In the depths of space, humanity's desperation hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy, suffocating, and ready to burst. The empire that had once towered over the stars now lay fractured, torn apart by alien invaders and the collapse of its fragile alliances. Earth, the last bastion of human power, was a war zone. Not a distant, romantic battlefield, but a scarred, ruined world on the edge of extinction. And in the heart of it all stood Major Aiden Kael, a soldier whose name had long been forgotten by the vast majority, but one that had come to carry the weight of humanity's survival. Kael's hands gripped the command console as the light of the screens flickered, painting his face with a haunting glow. His eyes, dark from sleepless nights and years of war, darted across the battlefield data, trying to make sense of the chaos. "Damn it!" he muttered under his breath, staring at the status report on the latest alien assault. The alien force, the Xirath, had arrived years ago, swarming into every system with brutal efficiency. Now, humanity's last stronghold was a crumbling fortress. "Sir, we're about to lose Grid Delta," a voice crackled from his earpiece, thick with panic. It was Corporal Juno, one of his most trusted soldiers. "The enemy's advancing faster than predicted. We're outnumbered and outgunned." Kael's jaw tightened. This wasn't new. This wasn't unexpected. For months, they'd been losing ground. Every day, a little bit more of Earth's once proud cities fell under the Xirath's boot. But this time, there was something else. A sense of finality. A feeling that this battle would be different. "We need to fall back to the last defensive line," Kael ordered, voice steady, despite the turmoil raging inside him. "Prepare the troops for extraction. Juno, get on the line with command, tell them to send reinforcements." A pause. The silence on the other end was deafening. "Sir, command says there's no help coming. They've already pulled most of the resources from this sector. Earth's a lost cause." Kael's heart skipped a beat. The news hit like a fist to the gut. Earth was on its own. There would be no reinforcements. No last-minute salvation. "I know," Kael replied. His voice was calm, almost eerily so, considering the situation. He clicked off the communication and slammed his fist down on the console. The machinery sparked, reacting to his frustration. He was no hero. He was just a soldier. But there was one thing Kael knew better than anyone. When the odds were stacked against you, when all seemed lost, there was still one thing humanity had that no alien force could ever account for: raw, unrelenting defiance. Turning, Kael stormed towards the exit of the command bunker. The soldiers stationed there, men and women who had fought beside him for years, stood at attention, their faces ashen, their eyes reflecting 1,000 battles and no victories. His presence commanded silence, but no one spoke. They knew what was coming, knew what they had left. "Major!" A voice interrupted the quiet. It was Lieutenant Mara Quinn, a young officer whose optimism had not yet been fully crushed by the weight of their impossible odds. She was holding a report, her face clouded with concern. "Sir, we've received intel. The Xirath are preparing to launch something big. It's not just a final assault. It's—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Kael had already seen the same reports. The aliens had been working on something for months, something that would shift the balance of power forever. Kael had feared this moment, but now that it was upon him, he felt a sense of clarity, a clarity that had been missing for far too long. "We'll stop them," he said simply. Quinn's eyes widened in disbelief. "But how? With what?" Kael's gaze turned steely. The edge in his voice was unmistakable. "We'll use what we have left. The enemy doesn't know it, but humanity's strongest weapon is still in its arsenal. The very thing they've underestimated for centuries." Quinn stared at him, puzzled, but before she could speak, a sudden, harsh noise interrupted their conversation, a blaring alarm, the kind that heralded disaster. "Sir, the city's gone dark. The outer defense grid just went offline," shouted one of the communications officers, panic in their voice. Kael's thoughts moved at lightning speed. Earth's final line of defense was crumbling. They were moments away from complete collapse. There was no time for hesitation. Get me the rest of the command officers. Now! He barked. In a blur, the other commanders were on the line. Major Tessa Kyer, the tech officer, spoke first, her voice strained. Sir, I'm seeing high-frequency anomalies in the Xirath network. Something's happening, but I can't get a clear read on it. Whatever they're planning, it's big. We don't have the luxury of waiting, Kael said, his resolve hardening. Activate Operation Salvation. We push forward. We fight until the last man stands. No retreat. There was a moment of silence on the comms. The weight of the command sank in, but it wasn't hesitation that followed, it was recognition. They all knew this was a suicide mission. No one expected to make it out alive. But that was the point. This wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about making the last stand, about showing the Xirath that humanity would not die quietly, that they would not surrender, that they were more than just a species on the verge of extinction. Kael took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of what was to come settle in his chest. This was humanity's final hour. And it was his job to make sure the galaxy would remember what happened here. We might be the lowest life form in the Empire, but we're about to make the highest impact, he said grimly. As the plan began to take shape, the sky above Earth darkened. The battle for humanity's future was about to begin. And this time, it wasn't just about survival. This time, they were going to win. The skies above Earth had long since been drowned in ash, but tonight, they burned brighter than ever. Flashes of green and blue exploded across the horizon as the Xirath unleashed their full arsenal of weapons upon humanity's last stronghold. The air smelled of ozone and desperation. Each breath Kael took a harsh reminder of how much longer Earth had before the invaders consumed it whole. Inside the war room, Kael paced, his boots echoing against the concrete floor as the quiet hum of equipment buzzed around him. The flickering lights overhead only added to the oppressive weight in the room. He was tired, bone-deep exhausted, but he refused to let it show. The mission ahead was too important. They couldn't afford weakness. Not now. Lieutenant Quinn entered, her face tense, eyes wild with the kind of alertness only a soldier about to face oblivion could possess. Major, we've finished preparing the extraction teams. The men are ready for Operation Salvation, but there's a problem. Kael stopped pacing, the words hanging in the air like an unwelcome omen. What's the problem? The Xirath, they've deployed something new. A weapon. Something they didn't use before. Our scanners can't penetrate its signal, but we've picked up on it. Whatever it is, it's shutting down our defenses one by one. We're out of time. Kael's jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of every decision bearing down on him, pushing him closer to the edge. They'd been fighting for so long, surviving against impossible odds, but this was different. Have we confirmed its location? He asked, his voice steady. Quinn nodded. Yes, it's in the heart of the Xirath stronghold. But we don't have the manpower to make a direct assault. Not unless. Unless what? Kael cut her off. She hesitated, glancing at the tactical maps projected on the wall. Unless we use the weapon we've been hiding. Kael's eyes narrowed. The weapon she referred to was an ancient prototype, a human-made device built during humanity's early days of space exploration. It was a relic, a last resort, and only a handful of people knew about it. Kael was one of them, and though he hated the idea of using it, the situation was dire. You're talking about the Phoenix, Kael said, his voice like gravel. It's untested. It's a gamble. We don't know if it'll work, or if it'll kill us all. I know, Quinn replied, her expression hardening. But what's the alternative? Wait for the Xirath to finish what they started. This is our only shot. We take out that weapon, we take out their command center. We win. A tense silence followed. Kael stared at the map, his mind racing through all the scenarios. The Phoenix wasn't a guaranteed victory. It was as much a risk as it was a weapon. But Quinn was right. There was no other option. Fine, Kael said finally. We move out at dawn. Get the teams prepped. We'll hit them where it hurts. Quinn didn't waste any time. She turned to relay the orders to the troops, and Kael found himself alone in the room once more. Alone with the weight of a decision that would shape the course of history. Dawn broke, though there was little light to see. The sun struggled to push through the thick layer of smoke and ash that had settled over the planet. Kael stood before his soldiers, the first light of day casting long shadows across their faces. His soldiers, familiar faces, all hardened by war, stood at attention, their eyes gleaming with determination. "Listen up!" Kael's voice was sharp, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to rise. "We don't know what awaits us on the other side of this mission. The Xirath have something new, something dangerous, but we've got something they don't. We've got each other. We've got the fight in our blood. And we've got the will to survive. This is it, soldiers. We make our stand today. We do what no one thought possible. We take back our planet." A cheer erupted from the troops. Kael felt the fire in their hearts. The same fire that had brought humanity this far, even when the universe had stacked the odds against them. For a brief moment, Kael allowed himself to feel that same fire burn within him. Then he turned to Quinn, who stood at the ready, her face set in grim resolve. "You ready?" Kael asked. Quinn gave him a nod. "Ready as we'll ever be." The group boarded their transport vehicles, the engines roaring to life as they ascended into the sky, headed straight for the heart of the Xirath stronghold. The journey was brief, but every second of it felt like an eternity. The silence in the transport was suffocating, the only sound the hum of the engines, and the occasional rattle of the ship's hull. Inside, Kael's mind raced. The plan was simple: get in, deploy the Phoenix, and destroy the Xirath command center. But simple plans never went as planned. And the more Kael thought about it, the more he doubted they would even make it to the center. Then the alarms blared. The transport shook violently as an explosion rocked the side of the ship. The soldiers were thrown off balance, scrambling to keep their footing. Kael's eyes widened. The Xirath had anticipated their move. They were already under attack. "Hold on!" Kael shouted, gripping the sides of the vehicle as it swerved, dipping dangerously toward the ground. Another explosion rocked the hull, and the transport broke apart, sending pieces of debris flying in every direction. "Brace for impact!" Kael yelled, just before everything went black. When Kael came to, the world was silent, save for the distant sounds of enemy fire. He could taste the blood in his mouth, feel the deep cuts on his face, and hear the groan of twisted metal around him. His fingers twitched as he tried to move, but his body felt like it was made of lead. "Major!" Quinn's voice pierced the fog of his mind. "Major Kael, can you hear me?" Kael forced his eyes open, squinting against the light. He could make out Quinn, kneeling beside him, her face covered in dirt and blood. She was alive, barely. "We're alive," Kael rasped, pushing himself up. "But we've got to move. Now." The team was scattered, half of them either dead or critically wounded. But Kael didn't have time to mourn. The mission wasn't over. Not yet. "We hit them hard," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And now we finish it." The silence in the wreckage of the transport was unnerving. Kael's mind buzzed with adrenaline, each nerve alight as his senses recalibrated. He could hear Quinn's ragged breath beside him and feel the hum of distant explosions rippling through the ground. The chaos had taken them by surprise, but there was no time for regret. The mission wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Kael pushed himself to his feet, the weight of his gear making his limbs feel like lead. The fire of determination blazed in his chest, sharper than any wound. His soldiers were scattered, some alive, some not. Quinn was still alive, though, and that was enough for him to keep pushing forward. "Quinn!" he rasped, his voice hoarse from the crash. "Rally the troops. We move now." "Understood," she said, her voice steady despite the blood dripping from her temple. She pulled herself up, not bothering to wipe the dirt from her face, her eyes locking with Kael's. "But Major, the Phoenix. We don't have a clear line to deploy it. We'll need to cut through their defenses." Kael's eyes narrowed. There was no retreating now. They had one shot at this, and it wasn't a question of whether they were going to succeed, it was a question of how much it would cost them. "We move forward," he said firmly, glancing at the crumpled transport. "The Phoenix is humanity's last chance. We get to it, we deploy it, and we end this war." With that, Kael and Quinn signaled the surviving troops. They moved fast, using the wreckage for cover as they navigated the shattered landscape. The Xirath stronghold loomed in the distance, its cold, jagged spires rising like an ominous reminder of their enemy's power. They were close. But so were the Xirath. A burst of gunfire echoed from the distance. Kael ducked instinctively, pulling Quinn down beside him. The air seemed to hum with the anticipation of a battle about to erupt. The Xirath were ready for them, and they knew this would be their last stand. "Keep moving!" Kael barked, pushing them forward. The soldiers kept pace, their bodies moving as one, every step calculated, every breath measured. They weren't just walking toward the Phoenix, they were walking toward their fate. The tension in the air was palpable. Kael could feel the weight of each step, each heartbeat, knowing that it could all end in an instant. He had led his troops into battles before, but this felt different. There was no coming back from this. If they failed, humanity would be nothing more than a footnote in the history of the universe. Suddenly, a massive Xirath warship descended from the sky, its massive engines kicking up dust and debris as it landed with a deafening roar. The ground shook beneath them, and Kael's heart raced as the first wave of Xirath soldiers poured from the craft, their dark, insected figures charging toward them. "Fire!" Kael shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The soldiers opened fire, their weapons roaring to life as they unleashed a hail of bullets and plasma into the oncoming enemy. The Xirath soldiers were relentless, their movements fluid and alien, dodging the incoming fire with unnatural precision. But Kael's soldiers were just as determined. The battlefield was a storm of flashing lights, deafening blasts, and the screams of men and aliens alike. Kael could see it in his soldiers' eyes. This was the moment they had trained for. This was their war. "Keep them off us!" Kael shouted, as he broke from the line, leading the charge toward the Phoenix. He could hear Quinn's voice in his ear, giving orders, rallying the troops, but Kael's focus was singular. They had one chance at this. They had to reach the weapon before the Xirath sealed their fate. The journey through the battlefield was grueling. Kael led the charge, his weapon kicking out steady fire, cutting down Xirath soldiers as they came into his path. Each alien fell, but there were always more charging, more attacking, more screaming in their guttural language. Kael's heart beat in time with his movements. Every shot fired was one closer to the Phoenix, but with every step, the Xirath seemed to multiply. They were everywhere, swarming the battlefield, pressing in on humanity's last chance. "Take cover!" Quinn's voice rang in his ear as another blast from the Xirath warship tore through the ground. Kael dove behind a crumbling wall, his hands shaking as he scanned the area. The Phoenix was just ahead, within reach, but the enemy was closing in fast. Through the smoke and fire, Kael's eyes locked on the Phoenix. The device was massive, half buried in the ground, glowing with an eerie, pulsing light. Its surface was covered in strange alien symbols, remnants of an ancient technology, human-made but something far beyond their understanding. It was their final weapon. Humanity's last hope. Kael stood, determination flashing in his eyes. "Move out!" he shouted, signaling the rest of his team. The soldiers surged forward, sprinting toward the device as the Xirath closed in. But just as they reached the Phoenix, the ground beneath them shook violently, and an explosion ripped through the air. The Phoenix's energy shield flared, crackling with a violent burst of energy. Kael's heart skipped a beat. "Deploy it!" he yelled. But it was too late. The Xirath had already surrounded them, and there was no escape. Kael stood, shoulders square, staring down the incoming onslaught. The Phoenix was their only hope now. If they didn't use it now, everything they had fought for would be lost. With a final, furious cry, Kael punched the activation button on the Phoenix. The world exploded in a flash of light. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no sight. just a searing white-hot wave of energy that consumed everything in its path. When the light faded, Kael found himself on his knees, the battlefield a wasteland of smoldering wreckage. The Xirath were gone. Every single one of them, wiped from existence. Kael gasped for air, the pain in his body a distant echo as he looked around. The Phoenix had worked. Humanity had won. But at what cost? He could see Quinn, barely standing, bloodied and broken, but alive. She met his eyes, and for the first time in days, there was a hint of a smile on her face. "We did it," she whispered. Kael nodded, exhaustion flooding his limbs. "We did it." But deep down, he knew this victory was only the beginning. There would be more battles. More wars. And this was just the price they had to pay for survival. The silence after the explosion was deafening, a void where the roar of battle had once filled the air. Kael stood amidst the wreckage, his body aching with every breath. The Phoenix's energy blast had done its job, wiping out the Xirath forces in a cataclysmic wave of light and heat. But as he looked around the desolate landscape, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the cost. Earth was still scarred, and humanity had paid dearly for this moment of victory. Kael's fingers trembled as he wiped the sweat and blood from his brow, his eyes scanning the charred remains of what had once been a thriving battlefield. The smoke still rose from the ground, curling upward like the final remnants of a fading nightmare. His soldiers, what was left of them, were scattered, some dead, some too injured to stand. But there was something else in the air now. A new kind of tension, one that lingered beneath the surface. "We did it!" Quinn's voice cut through his thoughts. She was standing beside him, her face smeared with dirt, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. But there was something in her expression that mirrored his own. The relief of survival mixed with the bitter taste of knowing the fight wasn't truly over. Kael turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "We did. But at what cost?" Quinn glanced over at the soldiers, now trying to tend to the wounded, and then at the barren wasteland where the Xirath forces had once stood. "We've won, Major. They're gone. We did what needed to be done." Kael didn't answer at first. His mind was reeling with the aftermath of the battle, the loss of so many good men and women, the price of a victory that hadn't felt like one. They had destroyed the enemy, but Earth was still in ruins. Humanity might have survived, but it had paid a heavy price. "Humanity doesn't survive by surviving, Quinn," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "We fight, we win, but at the end of the day, we have to rebuild. There's nothing left here to rebuild." Quinn's brow furrowed. "You're saying we've lost?" Kael's gaze hardened, and for a moment, his face was a mask of resolve. "No. I'm saying the real war is just beginning. The Xirath were only one enemy. There will be others. We've only survived the first wave. We're still too weak." Quinn's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to him. "We fought the strongest enemy humanity has ever faced. And we won. Don't you see that? The rest can wait. We've got time now." But Kael shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Time is a luxury we don't have. Earth is in ruins. The Phoenix might have saved us today, but it can't rebuild a shattered world. We need to start planning for what comes next." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We need to start preparing for the next war." The soldiers, gathered around the remains of their transport, were speaking in hushed tones, tending to the wounded, checking their weapons, looking for any sign of the next threat. Kael knew that they, too, felt the heavy weight of the uncertainty that lay ahead. Despite the victory, there was no real sense of triumph. They were still on the edge, still in danger, and they all knew it. "Major Kael," came a voice from behind. It was Tessa Kyer, the tech officer, her face pale and drawn from exhaustion. She had been one of the few who had survived the initial blast and was now carefully examining the data gathered by the Phoenix. "You might want to see this." Kael exchanged a look with Quinn, then turned toward Tessa. "What's going on?" Tessa motioned for him to follow her, leading him to the makeshift command center. A few surviving soldiers were huddled around computers, their eyes flicking nervously between the screens. The data they were pulling from the Phoenix was now running in real time. As Kael approached, Tessa handed him a tablet with the latest report. His eyes flicked over the numbers, scanning for anything unusual. "There's something we didn't anticipate," Tessa said, her voice shaking slightly. "The Phoenix didn't just disable the Xirath forces, it disrupted something much bigger. I've been cross-referencing with the galactic databases. The Xirath weren't alone. They had a second wave, one we never even saw coming. It's already en route." Kael's heart sank. "What does that mean? A second wave? How long until they arrive?" Tessa's fingers trembled as she tapped through the data. "A few days. Maybe less. But that's not the worst part. This second wave is a full-on invasion force, unlike anything we've seen. A fleet of ships, multiple warlords. And they're bringing something even worse than the Phoenix." Kael's mind raced. "Something worse? What do you mean?" Tessa met his gaze, her eyes wide with fear. "The Xirath didn't just want Earth. They wanted Earth's technology, our weaponry, our human-made systems. They've found something here, something far beyond what we could have ever imagined." Kael's blood ran cold. He turned away from the screen, trying to process the new information. It was clear now that the Phoenix was only the beginning. Humanity might have survived the first onslaught, but a far darker force loomed just beyond the horizon. "We need to move fast," Kael said, his voice low but firm. "Prepare the soldiers. We need to gather what little we have left and get to work on the next phase of this war. We're not done yet. And we won't be until we take back what's ours." Quinn stepped forward, her voice resolute. "We'll get it done, Major. But we need a plan. A real one." Kael nodded. "We start with what we know. The Xirath came for Earth once, and they'll come again. But this time, we'll be ready. We'll make sure they know humanity isn't going down without a fight." As he looked out over the ruined battlefield, Kael's mind hardened. Earth may have been a wasteland, but it was still their home. And they weren't going to let it fall. Not while he had breath in his lungs. "We're going to rebuild," he said quietly, his voice filled with unshakable resolve. "And when the Xirath return, we'll show them that humanity is no longer the lowest life form in the Empire." He turned back to face Quinn, his eyes burning with determination. "We'll make them regret ever setting foot on our planet."